right, well, good morning, River Church. My name is JT, and I'm one of the pastors and also serve on staff here at River Church. I don't want to leave a group out. Tom was kind of thanking a few different people, and there was one very important group, our parking team. Our parking team. Thank you guys for our parking team. We especially thank them because this week, next week, and the next couple weeks, it's going to be a little crazy out there. So as they give direction, if you all don't mind, just kind of like watching and kind of like working with that team as they try to get things straightened out. And we pack as many cars as we can around our church building. So we are in the book of John. We started last week. I gave an introduction to the book of John. And this week we'll be looking at the first kind of portion of John chapter 1. So back even further from that, the very beginning of the Bible, like Scripture tells us, God made man in his own image. Right? God made man in his own image. That doesn't necessarily mean, obviously, it means we don't physically look like God, but it means we have characteristics, we have traits. There are things about us, qualities in all of us, in all humans that resemble who God is. Like we have the capacity to love. We have a sense of justice. Sometimes skewed, sometimes not, but we have a sense of justice. We have the ability to reason. Like all these things, humans are made in the image of God. But here's the irony that we're going to start off with this morning, is that even though humans were created in the image of God, more often than not, or I think a lot of the times, we try to recreate or fashion God in our image. Like we come up with ideas, we flip the script, and we try to create God and make him to be who we feel like he should be. It's like most people, even if they don't have like any particular religious background, or just in general, like there's no basis for what they believe other than their experience itself, like most people still have very strong opinions on who God is, or strong opinions about what we think God would do in any given situation. Right, here's some examples, right? Maybe you've heard this before. I can't believe in a God that would allow, and then just fill in the blank. I can't believe in a God that would allow natural disasters, that would allow genocide, that would allow terrible things that have happened to me or that I've witnessed happen. I can't believe in that kind of a God. We wouldn't allow it. We wouldn't want that happen. So then surely God wouldn't allow that to happen either. Right, we're creating God in our image. Or how about this? God can't forgive me for the things I've done. Like God can never forgive me for the things I've done. Maybe you've heard that. Well, we put this idea on our version of God, like because I can't forgive myself, so surely he can't forgive me either. I remember one time I was in church and heard someone say, I wouldn't be surprised if like someday God just like makes the whole state of California just fall off into the ocean. Right? What are they doing there? Like they're assuming God's, like their own personal like distaste for California politics are shared by God, and they're putting that on God and assuming that he also would like just like want them to just fall off into the ocean. Like it's all of these statements, these are kind of things that we believe about God, and there are a lot more, but that we believe about God, and there's no foundation in Scripture or anywhere else. Basically, it's just us, people, and we feel strongly about something, like something makes a lot of sense to us. So surely God feels the same way, right? So surely God feels that same way that I do about that thing. We create God in our own image. And so all this to say, like, a lot of times we have wrong views of God. We have wrong views of Jesus. And today we're in the first section of the Gospel of John. Last week I mentioned that the whole focus of our time was that John's purpose in writing this book was that we would believe and have life. We believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and that the Christ and believing in him, we would have life. So if we're going to believe in Jesus, like John, he starts off this particular gospel like with a clear introduction to who Jesus is. Like John is telling, specifically, John tells us who Jesus is and what Jesus does in relation to people. So, who Jesus is, what Jesus does. That's what we're going to be looking at. We don't get to project our own views and ideas or our own belief systems onto Jesus. And then that's who Jesus is. Like we don't each get our own like personal version of Jesus. Like Jesus is a real person. He's God, and he is who he is, not who we decide we want him to be. So our aim for this morning is that we just want to do this. We want to step into this direction, and we're always pushing and building in this direction of to begin to have this fuller picture of who Jesus is, his core identity, especially as described by John here, and what Jesus does in relation to us. I have 9 of these, okay, 9 different observations on who Jesus is, and then 3 more observations on what Jesus does. And so that's how we're going to break our morning down this morning, okay? So, who Jesus is. First, Jesus is the eternal God. Jesus is the eternal God. John chapter 1, verse 1 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." So I mentioned last week that the Gospel of John, it's very different from the other 3 Gospels. We had Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Sometimes those are called the Synoptic Gospels. There's some probably shared resources that were used in writing those. John is different, right? John starts with this phrase, "in the beginning." In the beginning. So for a Jewish person reading from the nation of Israel at this time, they hear those words, that raises some concerns. Like where else have we heard that phrase? In the beginning. Genesis, like the very beginning of the Bible, Genesis 1:1, okay, the very first words of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So whenever a reader at this time, they start to read this in the beginning, they're just going to expect the next words are God created the heavens and the earth. So for the Jewish readers at this time as well, the name of Genesis was like literally in the beginning. That was the name of the book. They just used the first words of the book, and then that's what it was referred to. So John isn't doing this by accident. He intentionally chooses to start the story of Jesus like with the same name and the same first words of the Hebrew Scriptures. He's letting us know. He's letting us know this. Like, do you want to know where the story of Jesus starts? Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they started with his birth. They started with his baptism. Where does the story of Jesus start? In the beginning. The same place Genesis starts. Like before anything existed. And verse 2 makes this even more clear that Jesus is the eternal God. In case we didn't get the initial clue, verse 2 says he was, speaking of Jesus, in the beginning with God. Jesus exists or existed eternally. Jesus is the eternal God. Okay, so in fairness, okay, if you look at this verse, it says it uses the word word, right? In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. So our next point, though, to clarify that, is that the second thing that Jesus is Jesus is the Word. Jesus is the Word, okay? John doesn't come out and say it initially. He kind of leaves it a little bit of a mystery for the reader as they start into this. But eventually, he lets us know who is the Word that he's been talking about. Verse 14, he gives a pretty strong hint. Verse 14 says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." So this Word became flesh, dwelt among us. And then verse 17, he finally says, Jesus, okay, this is who it is. This is who I've been referencing in all of this first introduction. It is Jesus. Jesus is the Word. So John could have written in verse 1, like we'll rephrase this, in the beginning was Jesus. And Jesus was with God. Jesus was God. Jesus was in the beginning with God. And Jesus became flesh and dwelt among us. Like John could have written it that way, but he didn't. He chose to call Jesus the Word, to refer to Jesus as the Word. So why? Why? Among a whole lot of reasons that I think John did this, I'll give an important one. What is probably the most common way people express ourselves? All sorts of things, but our words, right? We express ourselves through words, through spoken words. Like when children are young, they first start to feel these like strong emotions and they're trying to communicate things. You know, what does a parent say? Well, use your words. You're trying to draw out an expression through words. Well, Jesus, the Word, is the perfect living expression of God. Like Jesus is the Word. Jesus is the message of God. Jesus is what God communicates. The life of Jesus, the heart and life of Jesus perfectly embodies and his life expresses in this very real and tangible, recorded and written for us to see way what the heart of God is. We can know God's heart. Jesus is the Word. He expresses himself through the life of Jesus. And the third thing that Jesus is the creator. So chapter 1, verse 3 says, all things were made through him, through Jesus, and without Jesus was not anything made that was made. So Jesus is the creator. Paul wrote in the letter to Colossians, he said it just a little bit different way. This is Colossians chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. It says, and he's talking about Jesus, he says, for by Jesus all things were created. Like all things, anything in heaven, anything that's on earth, the things that are visible, the things that are invisible, like it's thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, like all things were created through Jesus, through him, and they were all created for Jesus. And he is before all things. So Paul here is like reasserting, like Jesus is eternal. He was before all things, and in him all things hold together. So these are two clear places, okay? These are two clear places that help us understand, like Jesus didn't just suddenly appear during the story of Christmas. Right? Jesus is the creator God that was around from the beginning of time, at the beginning of Genesis, and he exists in all of eternity, like both directions of eternity, eternal past, eternal future, like Jesus is. And since the name isn't in the Old Testament, I think this is important for us to bring out. Like, it doesn't say Jesus in the Old Testament scriptures, so it's easy to overlook the reality of Jesus and the presence of Jesus throughout that Old Testament period. But Scripture teaches, he is in the beginning, and that all things were created through him, all things were created for him. So, Jesus, the eternal God, he's the Word, he's the creator God, and fourth, Jesus is life. Jesus is life, and verse 4 says, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. So, in Jesus' life, without going too deep into this morning, I do want to say this. If Jesus is life, okay, so follow me with this one for a little bit, okay? If Jesus is life, that means the presence of Jesus means the presence of life. Right? If Jesus is life, that means the presence of Jesus means life is there. So basically, if Jesus is there, then life is there. Okay, and the opposite is true. If Jesus isn't there, the absence of Jesus means the absence of life. So let that one kind of bring that one into real life for a little bit, okay? Let that one stew around, percolate for a little bit. Like in my marriage, how I relate to my wife. If Jesus is there, then life is there in my marriage. The absence of Jesus means the absence of life in my marriage then. In raising children, how I choose to raise and how I interact with children. If Jesus is there, then there is going to be life there. Absence of Jesus in that part of my life means the absence of life in raising children. Or how about just everyday things that we all walk through and we're wrestling with, like in times of anxiety or hardship or struggle, the same is true. If Jesus is there, even in those types of things, then life is there. But the absence of Jesus means the absence of life through anxiety, hardship, and struggle. So Jesus is life. Jesus is life. And just as I was thinking about this makes me think, am I making, on a daily basis, am I making a conscious, effort to make sure I'm inviting Jesus, I'm allowing him, or I'm acknowledging his presence in all these different aspects of my life? Here's an example of just a simple thing that this might look like. Maybe it's just a simple prayer. Jesus, I recognize, I just maybe had an argument with my spouse, and so Jesus, my marriage isn't what it should be, so help me out. Help me out. Just be with me as I try to love my wife well. It's just a simple way to invite Jesus, his presence, and his life into different areas of our lives. Jesus is life, okay? Next claim about who Jesus is. Still in verse 4, it says Jesus is the light of men. Then verse 5 adds this. It says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So here's a picture that I found to represent this. A picture of a dark room with a light there. Kind of looks like an interrogation scene from a movie or something. Okay, I just found this online for this illustration. Okay, it's a dark space, but like we see, there's light in the middle of this dark space. Now, by the scripture, okay, what can darkness do to light? Like, how can darkness, I know this is like this, John speaks in this strange imagery, but what can darkness do to light? Like, okay, if we go in the room, you cut the cord or flip the switch. We're not talking about that. John gives us this imagery, right? Darkness is just the absence of light. Like, darkness cannot do anything to light. Darkness cannot overcome light. So if someone is in this room, and we're going to kind of bring it to our hearts. If someone is in this room and they want to experience light, what do? You just move a little closer to the light. Right? If you're in this room and you want to experience darkness, well, what do? Well, you move away from that light and you kind of get out in the dark space. So I never want to like oversimplify the complexities of our lives. Like, we're complex people, we have complex problems, but at the same time, sometimes it can be this easy. Like, sometimes it really is just this easy. Jesus is the light. He's the light of men. We get closer to him, we're going to experience more light in our lives. We're going to see the next step we take in life. We're going to see where we're headed. If we move away from him, we're going to experience darkness in all kinds of ways. That's what he's saying. Jesus is the light. But number 6, Jesus is also the true light. Verse 9 says, the true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. So this actually seems to indicate as well that there are some things out there. There's some things out there that seem to put off some light, that some things that might seem to give us some direction in life. But it's not the true light. And so John wants to make sure that we know, like, there is one true light. Jesus is that true light. Excuse me, the 7th thing from this passage, Jesus is God among us. Jesus is God among us. Verse 14, I read this earlier. It says, the Word became flesh and it dwelt among us. Over the last couple of years, this one actually has personally become one of my favorite pictures of how God gives us, that God gives us of himself, like in the Old Testament. A major theme, we walked through this a couple of years ago through the first 5 books of the Bible. A major theme in those first 5 books is the presence of God. In the book of Exodus, which is the second book of the Bible, like God's people, they'd been enslaved. They're slaves in the nation of Egypt for several generations. Well, finally they escape Egypt, and then they all gather, like about 1 million different people at the foot of a mountain. Okay, they're all gathered at the foot of this mountain. They're in a safe place. Their leader, Moses, he goes up to the top of the mountain, and whenever he's at the top of this mountain, he has a personal encounter with God. Moses enters into God's presence. Like, this is big, okay? This is big in Scripture already. Like, people hadn't been in the presence of God since the fall of Adam and Eve, when Adam and Eve were walking with God in the garden. So now Moses, in God's presence, that's a new stage of, like, history for all of us, for humankind. But God doesn't want it to stop there. Like, he doesn't want it to just stop at Moses, because he wants his presence to be, like, right there, like, among the people. So what did he do? He had all the people. He gave instructions for them to build a tabernacle. Tabernacle is a kind of like a makeshift tent. It's like a mobile tent temple. Okay, such that like whenever God's people, they moved around and they camped in different spaces, like God's presence, they would stop, they could set up the tabernacle, and God's presence was right there in the middle of the people, among them. Cool. So let's go back. Okay, go back to verse 14. A literal translation of that last part of this verse that we just looked at. The Word, or Jesus, became flesh, and he dwelt, or he set up a tent. Jesus tabernacled among them, among us. So Jesus is like God among us. Jesus, his presence isn't distant and removed from us. And for John, this is also kind of a shout out to a prophecy from 730 years before Jesus was born. Isaiah wrote, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. It says, behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. What does Emmanuel mean? God with us. God with us. So 730 years later, this is fulfilled in Jesus. Jesus didn't want it to be like when the presence of God was removed and up on this mountaintop while the people were down at the bottom of the mountain. But Jesus is God with us, God among us, God who set up his tent with us, whose glory is like among and tabernacling among us. So Jesus is God among us. Number 8, Jesus is the Son. Verse 14 says, and we have seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father. So Jesus is the Son. We'll leave it at that this morning. Our last thing that we see about Jesus from this passage on who he is as the Son. As the Son, Jesus is the visible and physical representation or expression of God himself. Jesus is the perfect representation of God. Verse 18 says it this way. It says, no one's ever seen God. But God, the only Son, who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. So even Moses, back on that mountaintop experience, like whenever he came into God's presence, Scripture makes it clear he didn't fully see God, but the Son, or the Word, the expression of God, like when we see Jesus, we see God. Like when we see Jesus, so all those other opinions and ideas that we come up with about those versions when we're trying to create God in our own image, like we don't get to do that. We don't get to create our own version of who God is. If we want to see God, the very real person of Jesus, he is God. He is God. And Jesus' life that we read about and you study and we can learn and we can look in the book of John, he is a perfect expression of God's heart. So you want to know how God feels. Like we want to know how God feels about the outcast, about those that have been ostracized within society. Like look at what Jesus did to people that fit into that category. Then we know how God feels about them. We want to know how God feels about hypocrisy. Look at how Jesus treated hypocrites. We want to know how God just feels about humanity in general. Look at how Jesus suffered, how he was crucified on our behalf, because that's how God feels about humanity. He has an incomparable sacrificial love towards us. And we know that because Jesus sacrificially loved like us. And so we want to know what God is like. We look at Jesus and we look at his life, which brings us to our next section is what does Jesus do, or what did Jesus do? What Jesus does. Okay, we looked at who Jesus is. Now we have a shorter version of what Jesus does. Now think about it a second. Okay, you can answer this question to the person next to you if you want here. Okay, this is an agree or disagree question. We know who a person is by what a person does. Agree or disagree? Go ahead and tell someone next to you. Okay, we know who a person is by what a person does. Okay, I don't know. I would agree, okay? I would agree. Like, it might not be 100% true all the time, but in general, our actions, our words, right, those are expressions of who we are, what we believe. So, to even further understand who Jesus is, to make sense to like look at what he does, his actions. And John, in his introduction to Jesus, he tells us what Jesus does. He says, Jesus gives light to everyone. That's the first one we'll look at. It's a little bit different from earlier. Before we said he was the light, right? Jesus is the light. But now we're looking at what he does with that light. In verse 5, it says, the light shines in the darkness, but darkness has not overcome it. The true light, which gives light to everyone. So Jesus gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. So that picture that we looked at earlier, right? That the room with the light in it, remember, like we get closer to the light, then we can see, we get further from the light. Well, John says, like Jesus like gives this. He gives this to everyone because everyone experiences darkness, but light is available. Like no one, especially like those of us in this room who are looking at the words of Jesus right now, looking at the life of Jesus, like no one has to permanently stay stuck in darkness. And we feel darkness at times. Like we feel it. We experience, but nobody has to stay permanently stuck in darkness. Jesus gives light. Like he gives light to everyone. Second, what else does Jesus do? Jesus experiences rejection. Despite all of those things, like who he is, Jesus experiences rejection. Verse 10 says he was in the world, and the world was even made through him, but the world didn't know him. He came to his own, and his own people, the people of Israel, they did not receive him. So back to back personal and hurtful rejection. Like John wants to make sure he wants us to see how personal this rejection is. Jesus wasn't rejected in this way that's kind of like vague, out there, meaningless. Like two groups of people are listed here. John chose those for a reason. Like the very world that Jesus created, and then the very specific people within all those people that were his people, those rejected him. Like any rejection's hard, right? We've experienced it. Like nobody likes rejection. But the closer you are, the more emotionally tied you are to a person or people, the more that rejection just stings and hurts. And Jesus is rejected by the very ones he loved, whom he created, and whom he died to save. And in verse 12, though, says, despite this rejection, verse 12 says, but to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, despite this rejection, he gave the right to become children of God. And so the third thing from this passage, and this is the final one we'll look at this morning, is that Jesus gives the authority, he gives the power, or he gives the right to become a child of God. He makes our adoption into his care possible. I was thinking about this a couple days ago, like giving this right for somebody to become a child, like the right of sonship or the right of daughterhood, like this isn't just like an arbitrary thing. We don't just get to like pick and choose and decide like how this works in society or in any situation, right? Like, we're not going to leave from this service and then let's all head back to the splash station and just kind of whichever kid looks the cutest or the most well-behaved, let's just grab that one and go, right? Like we don't get to do that. They're biological rights. There are laws, a lot of boxes that need to be checked in order for one individual to become like a child, to become a recognized child of another individual or a couple. So my wife and I, we personally experienced this the hard way. After we had our oldest son, we began the adoption process for a second child. And I think it was a couple months in, we were matched with an expecting mom. The mother was at the time 13 years old. She was turning 14 when the baby was due. And so there were some difficult circumstances ahead for this young mother and her family. But when she went into labor, we got a phone call. And so we immediately drove up, went to the hospital. Baby was born. He was with us. And we had a room there in the hospital where we stayed. We started taking care of him, feeding him. He was with us for 2 nights. And then on the next day, when we were supposed to check out of the hospital, things were finalized, the mom changed her mind. That was hard. It was really hard for us. But also, that was unquestionably, that was that mother's right. She had the right and the authority over her biological child. And my point in this story is that, like adoption, it's not just a given. It's not just a given. Like there are rights, there are authorities, there are various parties involved. And in this passage, Jesus is saying, like, I have authority over all of that. Like that whole adoption process. Like I have that. And he's saying, like, I'm giving that power to you. I'm giving those rights over to you. And we can live as children of God. Verse 13, he continues and he makes it clear, like, you're a child who is not born, not of blood. So this isn't a biological thing, nor a child. It's not the will of the flesh, not by normal means and desires of having children. It's not the will of man, meaning it's something that we willed or that we initiated. It's of God. It's of God. God does this. Jesus gives us this right. It's by his initiative, and it's by his authority. And he explains, like, there's only one thing on our part, one requirement on our part that we do in order to, like, assume or to take hold of this adoption. It says, to all who receive him and believe in his name. It's the same thing. Receive, believe in his name. We believe by receiving. We receive by believing. If we do that, we have the right to become children of God. Legitimate children of God. Now think about what we've been saying about Jesus so far this morning, though. Jesus, the eternal God, the living Word, the Creator, the life, the light of men, the true light, the God among us, the Son, the perfect physical, visible expression of God himself, Jesus who gives light to all, Jesus who was rejected by the world, Jesus who was rejected by his own people. Like that, Jesus is extending to us the right to live as children of God. And this is an offer that's for everyone. And so this is the first time. Like if this is your first time at church and like you've heard any of this, like Jesus makes this offer to us. Or if we've been a faithful follower of Christ for decades, Jesus makes this offer to us. Like following Jesus for decades doesn't change the fact that like for today to experience and live in all these attributes of who Christ is, to live as a child of God, we need to actively believe him, continue to believe him today and now. And so I have a slide to put up here. We may already be looking at it. This is just a list of all the things that we talked about this morning. And I want us to just look at this, like try to remember some of the things that like resonated with you as we were walking through these different ones. And I want us to choose one of these that's just been the most difficult for you personally to believe. Or it's like one of those you look up there, it's like, I know that's true, but my life right now sure doesn't feel like it. Doesn't feel like that's true. Mark chapter 9:24, there's a prayer where a man says to Jesus, he says, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. That's what I want to ask us to pray this morning. I want us to choose just one of these or two of these and just take some time to pray that prayer. Like, Lord, I believe you are like the life. And I don't have life in a lot of areas of my life, but I believe you are. Help my unbelief. Okay, so let's take some time. I believe, God. I believe that you make me, that you extend this offer to me to be a child of God. I believe that. Help my unbelief. And so that's how we're going to close out. Have just a moment to sit, pray, do that. Worship team, you guys can start making your way forward. And Brent, just when the time is right, just start leading us in prayer or singing. So let's just sit and have this prayer to ourselves right now.